Greetings, psychology students. We are going to be jumping in on our last week of learning here. We will continue learning, of course, next week, but we will be learning about things other than learning. So this will be our last week learning about learning in our psychology class. And we're going to cover a couple of different things. We're going to talk about observational learning, and then we're going to do some sort of catch-all stuff to close us out. So first, observational learning in people. We're going to talk about what vicarious learning is, how to model learning and what modeling requires if it's going to be successful. And then, of course, antisocial or pro-social behaviors will be the way that we'll finish out observational learning. We're also going to talk about some other things after that. So jumping right in. The imitation onset. So this is learning by observation, and it comes about very early in life. Like humans learn very, very quickly to imitate. And you guys are all familiar, I'm sure, with the phrase monkey see, monkey do. Mom touches her nose, baby touches his nose, very cute. Not only that, but you can see little kids in the back learning how to do ballet, and they are, of course, imitating their teachers, right? Imitation is a thing that people do. And then here, Tommy, where did you learn bad things like that? Vroom, move over, you speed up, you stupid. Yeah, you get the idea. Tommy here has picked up these words. Tommy, of course, is probably 3 or 4, has never driven a car in his life, doesn't know what he's saying, but he has heard it said, and he is repeating it. And any of you who have been around toddlers will know that you have to be very careful with what comes out of your mouth, or it will start coming out of their mouths as well. So Bandura's Bobo doll study in 1961 shows that children learn through imitating others who receive rewards and punishments, right? So this is where social learning theory comes from. He coins this phrase. And the Bobo doll's experiments are as follows. Children will see an adult either beating up or being nice to the Bobo doll, and then the child will get an opportunity to interact with the Bobo doll. And surprise, surprise, the kids who see the adult beating up the Bobo doll will beat up the Bobo doll. And the kids who see the adult being nice to the Bobo doll will be nice to the Bobo doll. We, children in particular, are very, very often will copy the things they see people doing around them. So, vicarious learning. What is vicarious learning? It is learning by seeing the consequences of another person's behavior. So this would be one of those things where instead of you putting your hand in the fire and saying, "Ow, that's hot," you see someone else put their hand in the fire and say, "Oh, wow, that's hot. That's hot. Okay, I don't want to do that." The other person is modeling that behavior, and then the idea is that the learner will see if the model is reinforced or punished, right? Are they getting rewarded for sticking their hand in the fire, or are they being punished for sticking their hand in the fire? And there's something to be said about this, right? Like we've talked about mirror neurons, and when we were going through the brain structure, and this is really where that comes in, right? Neuroscientists have discovered that mirror neurons in the brain, animals and humans have both animals and humans have these, and these will activate when you are observing something else. If you see something else in pain, these sections of your brain will activate, right? And if you see somebody, and there's other parts where empathy, oh, this person is hurting, this person is sad, right? So there are parts of our brain that will reflect the people around us. When we see other people experiencing things, or even animals experiencing things, we will experience something too. Not the same thing, but your brain will create a facsimile of it, right? Create a mirror of it. So cognitive imitation, what do we have, right? How does it work? Essentially, we can develop that people and animals, right, will imitate each other. If I don't have the details that I need, I can look over at the monkey in the other cage and see what he's doing and try to copy him, right? And you see the kiddo here at the bottom is copying the lady on the other side, right? So she's looking at him, he's looking at her, she looks away over here, and now the kid's going to look over here as well. So how do we model? What do you need to make modeling work? Bandura suggests that there are 4 things you need for modeling to work. You need attention. So first and foremost, the kiddo or the learner has to be paying attention. If they're not paying attention, they can't retain. They can't do the next steps. Right? Retention. They have to be able to retain it. Right? Hold on to that information. That's what retention means: is being able to keep it, being able to hold on to it. So they have to pay attention. They have to be able to keep a hold of the idea or the thought. They have to be able to reproduce the behavior. Right? And then they have to be motivated to actually do it. If they're not motivated, the other three don't matter. If they can't reproduce it, the other three don't matter. So those four pieces are necessary. They have to be able to pay attention, hold on to the idea, and they have to be able to reproduce the behavior and do it themselves, and they have to be motivated to do it. Not only that, but the learner has to believe they can successfully carry out the behavior and control that outcome. This is self-efficacy, right? If the learner does not believe that they are capable of doing the thing, they will not try. That is a reality of teaching, right? If somebody believes that they can't do something, what's the point? They won't go for it, right? So the learner has to believe that they can successfully do it. So then let's talk about antisocial and prosocial behavior. Antisocial behavior would be negative, destructive, unhelpful behavior, stuff that you don't want people to do, right? And then prosocial behavior would be positive, constructive, and helpful behavior, right? Things that you do want people to do societally. Now, both types of behavior can be modeled effectively. Remember the Bobo doll experiment, right? Beat up the Bobo doll, the kid will beat up the Bobo doll. Be nice to the Bobo doll, and the kid will be nice to the Bobo doll. So the good news is, right, that prosocial behavior, positive, helpful behavior, can be modeled, right? And you can get prosocial effects from kiddos and prosocial activities and behaviors from kids by modeling it for them, by showing them how to do these things, and by involving them in it, which is very cool. The bad news, of course, is that antisocial behavior, like beating up the Bobo doll, this could come from family or from the neighborhood or from TV, can have really strong antisocial effects, right? And this comes to modeling violence. Research has shown that viewing media violence does lead to increased expression of aggression. So, children who watch pro wrestling are much more likely to reenact pro wrestling with their pals. This is true, right? And this is not to say that you can't enjoy pro wrestling or that you can't enjoy violent media. But what it does say is that when kids are exposed to it too early, it can lead to problems. So, television and observational learning. Gentile et al. In 2004 shows that elementary school-going children who are exposed to violent television videos and video games are expressing increased aggression, right? And then there's the other question: does this lead to desensitization? If somebody is exposed to these violent video games, do they then become desensitized to violence, and does it not bother them when they run into it later on? And there's some information, or there's some data that leads in that direction. Language and thought is going to be the next thing that we're going to talk about, to not to jump out of our video games bad discussion. But next thing we're going to talk about is language and thought too. And language, we're going to talk about its structure. We're going to talk about grammar. We're going to talk about stages of language development, linguistic determination, right? These ideas, these schemas, we'll get into that and what all that means. Parts of the brain, how they relate to language, and then also animal communication. So we got a lot to cover here with language and thought, and then that'll get us through to the end of what we need to do here today. So first, language. Is there another word for synonym? Does synonym have a synonym? Whose cruel idea was it for the word lisp to have an S in it? What if there were no hypothetical questions? Which, of course, is in and of itself a hypothetical question. So these are all games that are being played with language. Now, our spoken, written, or gestured word is the way that we communicate meaning to ourselves. It's the way that we communicate meaning to others. Of course, language transmits culture. Culture is transmitted through language. So what do we have? How is language structured? How do you build a language? First and foremost, you need phonemes. These are the smallest distinctive sound unit in a spoken language. For example, bat has 3 phonemes. You have the b sound, the a sound, and the t sound. Chat is another one. It's got 3 phonemes, right? Ch, a, and t. All of those combine to make those phonemes. So there's no meaning yet, right? It's just a sound, the b sound or the t sound, right? Next up, you have a morpheme, and the smallest unit that carries meaning is a morpheme. Now, it could be a word, but it could also be a part of a word. For example, you've got milk. That's a morpheme. Pumpkin. Now, pumpkin is its own word, but the morphemes of pumpkin are pump and kin, because a pump is a thing, kin is also a thing, right? Unforgettable has multiple morphemes in it. Unforget, table, right? All of these things are part of it. Now, unforgettable, of course, doesn't have anything to do with tables or getting things, right? But those are still the morphemes. They're still the pieces, right? What is the smallest piece that can carry meaning? That is a morpheme. So what do you have? What is language? Well, language is these trillions of sentences, right? These impossible numbers of ideas that are being structured together and thrown together and used to convey all sorts of things. Anything from, you're getting a traffic ticket to I like cookies. What composes that? Well, you have hundreds of thousands of words that are putting that together. All right, and what puts together those words? You have 100,000 different morphemes that are putting those words together, and then of those, how do you make those morphemes? Well, you have 40 different phonemes, right? And then those phonemes are combined using just 26 different letters. So those 26 letters, right, build up through this whole system to give us those trillions of sentences. So this is the structure of our language, specifically English, right? And different languages can be constructed differently, right? Chinese does not use the same alphabet as us, so the entire structure of Manchurian Chinese is going to be entirely different. Language development. All right, so children learn their native languages long before they learn how to do basic math, right? Language is one of the earliest things to pop up in the average human kiddo. We learn, on average, after the age of 1, something like 3,500 words per year until we've amassed about 60,000 words by the time we graduate high school. So your language acquisition has been going for a long time, and by the time you're done with high school, you'll probably have about 60,000 words in your vocabulary. So how does language start? We start with the babbling stage. At about 4 months, the infant spontaneously starts uttering various sounds like agu and blah, 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 right? Babbling is not an imitation of adult speech at this point. Babbling at this point is the kid getting comfortable with using those muscles. It's sort of similar to a kid grabbing its foot and being like, oh, wow, this is my foot. And then, of course, 10 seconds later, the kid grabs, oh, hey, yep, still my foot. So the babbling stage is very much a kid getting comfortable with their language muscle. And then you enter the one-word stage. This is beginning at or around the first birthday. A child starts to speak one word and makes family adults understand him. So, for example, the word doggy could mean something like, look, mother, the dog is outside. How exciting, right? And then we're going to move into two-word stage. Before the second year, a child is going to start speaking generally in two-word sentences. So this is called telegraphic speech. Telegraphic meaning you're telegraphing it. You're demonstrating it. It's very overt what the kid is trying to say. It's very straightforward. Something like in a telegram, go car might mean I would like to go for a ride in the vehicle, mother. May we go do that? Right? Yeah. And then you're going to start seeing longer phrases. After telegraphic speech is done, children start uttering longer phrases. Mommy get the ball, or mommy get ball, with syntactical sense. And by early elementary school, kids are generally enjoying humor. You never starve in the desert because of all the sandwiches there. Great joke. This is a wug. Now there is another one. There are two of them. There are two wugs, is probably what they're going for here. Now, English is an interesting language because plurals don't always do the same thing. For example, if this was an ox instead of a wug, This is an ox. Now there is another one. There are two of them. There are two oxen is the plural for ox, right? Goose, geese, um, mouse, mice. But in this case, they're probably trying to get us to say wugs, plural. But you get the idea. We don't necessarily just looking at this thing. It could be two wuggin. It could be two weeks. It could be two wigs. It could be two wugs. Who knows? So when do we learn language? Here's a summary. We sort of went over this. 4 months, you have babblings, many speech sounds. By 10 months, the babbling starts to resemble household language. At about 12 months or 1 year old, the kid starts to that one word stage. By 24 months, the kid's using 2-word telegraphic speech. And after about 2 years, you're going to start seeing that language develop rapidly into complete sentences. Grammar. Now, grammar is a system of rules in a language that enables us to communicate with it and understand others. So grammar is composed of 2 pieces. You have semantics and you have syntax, and we'll talk about both of those. Semantics is a set of rules by which we derive meaning from morphemes, right? These are words and sentences. For example, semantic rules tell us that adding an ed to the word laugh means that it happened in the past. We laughed yesterday. So that's a semantic rule. But again, English is complicated because we can say we laughed yesterday, but we didn't run yesterday. We ran yesterday. So the rules, the semantic rules of English, because English is a composite of a lot of different languages, right? German and French and Latin and or Arabic and all of these different pieces slapped together. Because of that, there are a lot of different semantic rules that English has, and this is why grammar in English is so frustrating. Syntax. So the rules for combining words into grammatically sensible sentences are syntax. So, for example, this is no longer playing with an individual word. Syntax is now playing with words together in a sentence. So English syntactical rules say that adjectives come before nouns. So, for example, the White House, right? But in Spanish, it's reversed. In Spanish, it's not Blanca Casa, it's Casablanca, right? So syntactical rules do not stay the same from language to language. And there's some pretty interesting pieces with that, right? So then grammar, let's put it into context here, right? The artist painted me on the porch. And you can see right there, the artist is painting me on the porch. There I am up on the porch, and the artist is painting me. Next, the artist painting me on the porch. You see 2 big letters, M and E, are on the porch, and the artist is painting them. So the artist painted me on the porch. And then last but not least, the artist painted me on the porch. And now the artist is actually painting on top of somebody who's standing on the porch doing a wonderful little T-pose there. You get the idea, right? Context is very important to grammar, right? And that grammar here, all these sentences are the same, but they're saying very wildly different things. And we have overgeneralization. Now, generally kids are going to apply those grammar rules, and they're going to apply them too broadly. We talked about this earlier, like laughed. We add ed to the end of it to say that it happened in the past, right? So example, I digged in the sandbox rather than I dug in the sandbox, which is the correct way to say it in English, right? And you can see there that those varieties of different syntax rules can be very confusing. Grandpa, yesterday I helped mommy broom the floor. Then we go to the toy store. So this kid has taken a noun, which is broom, turned it into a verb, and goed, past tense, of course, went, but that doesn't make a lot of sense. Goed makes a lot more sense, and then we go to the toy store. And so it gives you an idea of how the English language would work if all the rules were exactly the same. Kids are going to make those overgeneralizations, and they're going to struggle learning all those different nuanced pieces of the language. So, what theories do we have about language development? There's the operant learning or social learning, and that says it's all about nurture. It's all about what your experiences are. So Skinner says, 1957, right, 1985, language development can be explained on the basis of learning principles like association, imitation, and reinforcement. So what you experience, right, nurture, what you see in life, that's what you learn. Then there's the inborn universal grammar idea, and that says it's all about nature. Chomsky, sort of the same time period, just 2 years later on both ends, is saying that language learning is facilitated by a predisposition that our brains have for certain structures of language. You're either a language thinker or you're not, according to nature. You're going to be good at talkie talks or you're going to be bad at talkie talks. That's what you got, period. And so it's inborn, language acquisition device, the LAD, and they are referring to it as the nativist theory, right? It is what it is. It's there, period, or it isn't. And then, of course, you have the statistical learning and critical periods, and these people put together everything, right? They say it's nature and it's nurture. We're going to combine both of these things. So language acquisition is an example of biologically constrained learning. So yeah, there might be some people who are more excited and more interested in being able to learn than others and use language than others. But there's also a big piece of nurture, right? That you've got to be exposed to this language before. If unstimulated, you will lose the ability to master language, right? A kid who may have been a great linguist, who spends their entire youth being raised in the wilds by wolves, will never learn how to speak and will have a very hard time learning how to speak later on in life. And I think there's some pretty stark examples of that. And so this one's probably closer to the truth, right? You have nature and nurture. It's a combination of both. So then we have genes, brains, the brain, and language. So genes design the mechanisms for language, right? And experience modifies that brain. So it's not just genetic. It's not just biological. And it's not just sociocultural. There's a lot of different pieces that are involved and a lot of different moving parts that are involved, and many of them take place inside the human brain. So, of course, our level of understanding of this stuff is not as deep as it maybe could be. So, language and age. New language learning gets harder the older that you get, right? And the older someone is at the age of immigration, the poorer they are at the mastery of a second language. So, if someone who's born somewhere has a much better shot at mastering a language than somebody who moves to that country between the ages of, say, 17 and 19, right? Language mastery really falls off, right? Someone who I moved to Germany as a kid between the ages of 8 and 10. And very quickly, I learned the language. If I were to try to move to Germany now, having never lived there before, I would have a much harder time learning the language, and I would have a much harder time mastering it. Not only that, but language and thought are intricately interwoven. And the way we think about things is dictated in no small part by our language. There are a bunch of different examples of this. One that I like to talk about that's not in here is that supposedly one of the reasons that people in China are better at math early on is because of their language, because every one of their letters is a single monosyllabic sound, right? So for us to think about 7 plus 7, we have to think the word 7 and plus and 7. Whereas in China, the word 7 is a single syllable, and it's much quicker to think through. And that's one argument as to why math scores in China are higher than they are elsewhere. Worf noted that the Hopi tribe did not use a past tense in their verbs, that there was no past tense for it. And so according to Worf, the Hopi were not able to readily think about the past. And I don't think that that's the best way to look at it. I suspect that the lack of a past tense in their language also has some rather significant things to do with the Hopi ideas around creation and around existence. And also indigenous peoples near the Arctic Circle having well over 50 words for different types of snow and different types of conditions on the ground, which would make a lot of sense, right? Having different words for conditions that you're experiencing. And what that does then is language gives you words for objects and events, and it allows you to think about those objects more clearly and to retain them. If you have things that are important to you, given your environment, you're going to see more of that, right? Like, yeah. For example, if you take a look at all of these crayons here, these are blue crayons. But if you were an artist and you spent a lot of time working with different colors, for example, our good friend Bob Ross, he would probably have a much better way of thinking about each of these different crayons, and he would have words and ideas and thoughts connected to each of them and what those different colors are and how how he might use them. Worf observed something interesting at a chemical plant. That there are two storage rooms for gasoline barrels. One of the storage rooms has full barrels of gasoline, and one has empty barrels of gasoline. He further noticed as though that while no employees are smoking cigarettes in the room for full barrels, no one minds smoking in the room with empty barrels, even though this is a much more dangerous place to smoke due to the highly flammable vapors that still exist in the barrels. Right? Gasoline itself does not burn in liquid form. Gasoline burns in vapor form. So those empty barrels that have been opened are much more likely to be explosive than the ones that are closed. So he concluded that the use of the word empty in connection to the barrels has led these workers to unconsciously regard them as harmless, even though if you were to stop this worker and talk to them about it, they would probably be aware of the risk of explosions from those vapors. And if they worked through it, they would get it. But because the word empty is there, they don't think it's important. So we talked a lot about language and how that affects our thinking, but we also think in images. So we know that language has a big impact on thinking. When we're alone, for example, people will talk to themselves. Some people talk to themselves when other people are around. Don't judge me. However, we also think in images, right? So for a time when you wouldn't think in words, when you turn on the hot water, if you're thinking about turning on the hot water, you're doing that in an image in your mind. When you're thinking about riding your bicycle, again, these are images in your mind. And the reason is when you're imagining a physical activity, those same brain regions, right, when you actually perform the activity, are firing off. Remember those mirror neurons that we talked about? When you think about doing something, your brain is firing as though you're actually doing it. Last section we're going to talk about today, animals and language. Do animals have a language? And to a degree, yes, they do. Honeybees, for example, can communicate the location of new flowers and new nectar by dancing. So the dance moves clearly indicate the direction of the nectar, and based on what they do, they are giving directions to other bees. And there are certain common cognitive skills in humans and apes, but also in birds and also in other mammals. Concept formation, insight, problem solving, culture, even mind ? I mean, take this African gray parrot here, who is in the process of sorting red blocks from the green balls, right? So this bird can, when you say what's a red block, he's got the concept formation of what the color red is and what the color block is, and he can combine those two and move them around and get this right every time. Chimpanzees, of course, are showing insightful behavior when they're solving problems, right? Sultan here in this picture is using sticks to get food. Ravens will do this as well. Communication is another perfect example. There's no doubt that animals communicate, right? Dogs have, anyone who's owned a dog knows that they can convey all sorts of different things. This border collie here in the picture has a 200-word vocabulary, right? Sheepdogs know a number of different commands, and they can hear the whistle and know what they're supposed to say. Vervet monkeys, whales, even honeybees can communicate with other members of their species. They can communicate as well with members of other species. And then gestures, right? Animals show communication through gestures, as do humans. And it's possible even that vocal speech developed from gestures, although I wonder at that. And so the case of apes, right? Chimps do not have the vocal apparatus for human-like speech. So people have used sign language, American Sign Language, ASL, to teach chimps, even gorillas, how to sign. This particular chimp, Washoe, has learned 182 different signs by the age of 32. Here you can see a picture of him signing baby. And that brings us to the end of what I wanted to talk about today. If you have any questions, of course, you can find me in my office hours. between 10 and 11, and 2 and 3 any weekday of the week. Not this Friday, of course. I believe that is a scheduled staff workday. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to chat with me and see what you see. Ask me any questions, shoot me an email, whatever you need.